As we view the data in this worksheet, it's pretty apparent that the data in columns E and F, as well as the data in columns J, K, and L, really should be displayed differently. It's more or less a convention when numbers are 4 characters or more, we need commas. So, for the data in columns E and F, as well as the data in columns J, K, and L, we might want to consider putting in dollar signs. If we highlight for the moment just columns E and F, within the number group on the Home tab, we've got a dollar sign, we've got a dollar sign icon, a counting number format, and that puts in dollar signs as well as commas, as well as decimals. And when we're working with this feature, if it suddenly occurred to us that that really is probably not necessary, since we see the word salary here anyway, why not get rid of the dollars? And a lot of people will, first time around, say, well, we applied this, let's click it again to take it off. But that's not a toggle button, the way bold and italic and underline are. It simply reaffirms the choice. Now, the comma button here is certainly not the opposite, but many, many times when you're working with financial data, you either want to choose the dollar sign accounting format or the comma, which is almost the same, except the obvious difference is no dollar sign. Now, whether it's with dollar sign or comma, you might want to consider not showing the decimals. So we can either increase them, which we will do sometimes. In this case, let's decrease them. We have no pennies involved. You can see that they're all even numbers. Let's decrease the decimal twice. If this were scientific data, we might want to increase, show 3, 4, 5 decimals maybe. So it's very common, and for many, many people, many users of Excel, a lot of their formatting needs revolve around using the accounting number format or the comma format, and then making the appropriate adjustment to increase or decrease the decimals. Now, there are some options that we want to explore also behind the scenes. In columns J, K, and L, we might want to do exactly what we just did. Maybe just apply comma format. Look what happens with negatives. That may be totally appropriate. In accounting circles, it is considered appropriate. If we don't want the decimals in these cases, in all cases, maybe decrease the decimals, but the parentheses are still there, and that might be exactly what you want. But it's important to note that there is another format behind the scenes. And if we, for example, on these 3 columns, we could right-click and go right into Format Cells. You can also get here by way of Control-1. On the Number tab, recognize that we have an accounting format. That's what's currently in use. There's also something called currency, and there's something called number. It can get a little confusing at times about which one you want to use. And when you're getting data from other sources, sometimes there could be a mix, or maybe it's in contrast with the formatting that you've used. Recognize that accounting format, because it has negatives and parentheses, makes room for positive entries to have that extra half space out there so that if we're ever lining up our data, it's going to look appropriate. So if you look at column L, the commas are all lining up perfectly. And the same would be true if we were showing decimals. So for the moment here, we could increase those. I'll just go to 2 decimals this way, click OK. And do recognize the decimals are lining up, the commas are lining up. Let's undo that with Control-Z. So how about this other option out here? And we can also go back to Format Cells by way of Control-1. What's currency format here? Currency format gives us the option here of displaying negatives in a different way. And it also gives us the option of showing the dollar sign or not showing it. So what's going to be the difference here? First of all, the difference might be in the way that we're showing negatives. If we leave it at the current setting, it's going to be the same. But what else will be different maybe? We've got a dollar sign. Let's switch this to accounting number format. Watch the dollar signs. And if the column is made wider, all 3 of these will make them wider at once. Look at the dollar signs. So the dollar signs, when we're using accounting, hug the left side of the cell, you could say. If we use currency, and we can once again press Control-1, change these to currency, click OK, watch the dollar signs go immediately next to the number. So not trying to confuse you, but to point out that there are different kinds of numeric formats. The dollar sign, again, means accounting. There's a currency format as well. The comma here is accounting without dollar signs. Let's try that one again and see how that looks. And so you have to decide what's going to work best for you. But you do want to recognize there are those distinct differences. Now, once again, if we go back into the dialog box, Control 1, number is another option. And we might want to show these, the negatives, with minuses. Now, since we're not using parentheses here, the data will shift to the right. The negatives will have minuses. The positives will have nothing in front of them. And we see that display as well. And in all cases here, if we do not want to show decimals, we can click the button here to decrease the decimals and yet retain those other formats. So you've got a number of choices here. I think for a lot of people, what you want to do is to make this as convenient as possible is use $ and comma and ignore currency and number in the background, even though from time to time you might have to use them. So if I were looking at this data and wanted to make a change, I'd probably readjust the column widths like this, and that looks pretty good to me. If I wanted to make a change, possibly use accounting. I don't think so with the $, but we see what's happening there if I don't use comma. And so standardizing the display is easily handled with these features here, but recognize the distinction between there's an accounting format, there's a currency format, there's a comma format, and there's a number format as well.